Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to our Anne Arundel County tabletop discussion with our Board of Ed candidates from District 6. I'm Rochelle Halsey with the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Anne Arundel County Chapter. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming and thank our partnering organizations, the North Arundel Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority, RHOETAZETA Chapter, the Arundel Bay Chapter of Jack and Jill of America, and the Anne Arundel County NAACP, our partner organizations. I'd like to introduce you to our candidates from District 6, Ms. Joanna, Tobin, and Ms. India Ochs. Welcome. So we're going to start the conversation with Ms. Ochs. I want to ask you, can you just give us a brief background and bio on yourself?
Hello everyone, and thank you for hosting us tonight. I am India Ochs, born and raised in Annapolis, and now a mom of a 10-year-old son. It always seems a bit too American to talk about my background, but under this context, I understand the importance of people learning about who you are voting for. A product of our public schools, I went out of state for college, knowing I always wanted to come back and raise my family here in Annapolis. In undergrad, I double majored in political science and history, then acquired a master's in public affairs with a certificate in nonprofit management, before getting my Juris Doctorate specializing in social policy. In some ways I am a jack of all trades, but throughout everything I have done in life, it's always had that underlying theme, or mission, of public service and advocating for the rights of all individuals. And so right after law school, I served in AmeriCorps, establishing and running a nonprofit uniting youth with and without sensory disabilities in the Baltimore region, through service learning and sports projects. Since then I worked as a human rights attorney with the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Human Rights, collaborating with activists in 21 countries on everything from the right to education, to eliminating child labor and human trafficking, to combating slavery in the United States, the last of which was something that even the experts gathered at the United Nations in Geneva were shocked to hear was still going on in America, when I testified on the plight of our farm workers here. I also supervised the National Help Desk for 4 years, in partnership with the NAACP Foundation, dedicated to juvenile justice reform issues, before ending up as a compliance officer with the United States Department of State, protecting the health, safety, and welfare of foreign exchange visitors every year, including reviewing things like school accreditation, teacher contracts, and background checks for those who come here as students, teachers, and professors. But those are just line items on my resume. I will touch more on education later, but during the last 30 years I have taught law at a rural high school, facilitated numerous workshops, webinars, and leadership conferences, supported the victim families in the Panama 103 Lockerbie bombing trial, worked on Capitol Hill, was a guardian ad litem advocating for the rights of kids in foster care, done freelance web design work for various nonprofits and local businesses, including the early website days of Chesapeake Family Magazine, and co-authored an international book on stopping violence against people with disabilities. I also am just a normal mom in the community, at least prior to the shutdown, juggling my son's soccer games with my own soccer schedule, taking karate with my son, including being the only adult in special Jedi lightsaber training sessions, supporting music and the arts whether through my son's school or summer theater programs, or finding ways to bring people to experience the magical performances at the Kennedy Center for the first time, along with being a member of such activist organizations like ACT, our chapter of the NAACP, and showing up for racial justice. And thanks to the desire to further serve my community after Hurricane Katrina, I have been a member of the West Annapolis Coast Guard Auxiliary Flotilla for almost 15 years now, including being its first staff officer for diversity for the last 7 years, and being able to bring boating education to students from Robinwood and other neighborhoods feeding into Hillsmere Elementary School.
Wow. Ms. Oates, I'm not sure when you have time to just sleep. You're amazing. Your background is very diverse and your interests. So that's very exciting. Thank you. So, Ms. Tobin, I'm going to ask you the same question. Can you give us a little background and bio on yourself? Yep. You did you unmute? Okay.
There we go.
There you go.
Is that good?
Yeah.
So this is, I'm delighted to be here tonight. Thank you so much for hosting me. Yes, I am happy to tell everyone a little bit about my background. I know it's important for everyone to know who they're voting for. So I grew up all over the world. I grew up overseas, did pre-K in Hong Kong, elementary school in Zambia, Nigeria, Cameroon, Ghana, including in Cameroon in French schools when I didn't speak the language. So I picked up French on the fly as a 9 and 10-year-old and came back to this country for high school. My husband and I moved here in 1999. I have a BA from Wellesley College in Medieval Renaissance Studies. I have an MS from St. John's College here in Annapolis in Liberal Studies, an MA, apologies. And I have a PhD in Political Theory from Georgetown University. I actually started out as an actress working in the professional theater, moved from there to nonprofit management, and then went back and did my PhD. I taught for a number of years here in Annapolis at St. John's College, and then went on to be a senior moderator for the Aspen Institute, moderating leadership seminars in their programs all over the world. And I also currently chair accreditation teams evaluating charter programs, public charter school programs all over the country. So I've been engaged in education at all different levels throughout my career. My daughter, my husband and I have one daughter who just graduated from Annapolis High School this spring, class of 2020. And in my volunteer time, I have, about 10 years ago, I chaired a Citizens Advisory Committee on Recycling for the county. But I've also spent 3 years being vice president of the PTSA at Annapolis High, and I chaired the board of a private school here in the area. So I've had the opportunity to be involved in all levels of education. In addition, I'm very involved. I still keep a little bit of my past theater work, and I'm involved in the Colonial Players here in town. And I've always tried to keep my hand in the arts as well as the humanities and the social sciences, because I think broad education is the most important thing. I should say that my background really is a combination of my experience of living all over the world and being exposed to education systems all over the world. I've found that that is the thing that links us all together. Education is this opportunity for everybody. And I've brought all that experience to my life here in Annapolis. I love this community. I've been very involved in lots of different activities here. And so I hope to bring all of that to the community. So that's me.
Oh, great. Thank you. Both of you ladies have very diverse backgrounds and very interesting. So we're excited to hear that. So we're going to go back to Ms. Ochs, and I want to know what made you decide to run for District 6 Board of Education seat?
What made me decide to run for the Board of Education is probably the most asked question of any candidate, but I have to say it is one of the most interesting when thinking about my own life's trajectory. If one looks at this from 13,000 feet above, running for the Board of Education truly is a circle of life moment for me. As referenced earlier, I grew up in Annapolis, attending Head Start when it was located off of West Street, and going to kindergarten at Central Special, before being mainstreamed at Hillsmere Elementary, along with attending what was then Annapolis Junior High, and then being in the first 9th grade class at Annapolis High School. The fact is, I still remember that day when I was walking on the grass in front of Hillsmere Elementary, as I vowed in my head that I would have my son go to Hillsmere no matter what, and do everything possible to support our public schools and teachers, so that all kids could have the kind of remarkable experience I had. Growing up, I couldn't be prouder of our schools, such as experiences like in 5th grade taking code breaking at the Naval Academy, playing sports in junior high, or seeing how much of a national role model our county student government was. But to me, it was more than just all the opportunities I had to learn and thrive in. It was the positive interactions, such as talking to the reading specialist at Hillsmere when I asked why the school was breaking policy by placing me in another split grade class in 5th grade, and instead of covering for her colleague, she was honest in telling me they wanted me to put me back with the advanced group, after the 4th grade teacher refused to have me in her class. I am only sharing this story because all these years later, I don't think of that blatant discrimination in 4th grade, more than I remember the respect the reading specialist had for me as a human being at 10 years old, and that is the kind of respect, the kind of teacher, I want all our kids to experience, and why I wanted to make sure to always support our public schools. When I made that vow 35 years ago, I didn't quite envision that the rest of my life would end up building a playbook advocating on youth and education issues that I ultimately would use to be a powerful voice for our Annapolis families, but that is what happened. Along with my background on youth and educational issues at the national and international level described earlier, one just has to look at my advocacy starting in 8th grade to see that it wasn't just public schools, but in Arundel County schools specifically that have always been at the core of who I am, whether it was writing letters to the editor fighting to save extracurricular activities from budget cuts back at age 15, being chief legislative coordinator for CRASC, which is the county organization for student government, advocating to get the service learning graduation requirement implemented, collaborating to draft legislation giving the student member on the State Board of Education partial voting rights, and banning smoking on campus, or being asked to help with our county's curriculum back in 1993. The fact is the board's headquarters on Riva Road felt more like home than school did, which is why I felt so lucky going to Annapolis High, since it was just a 5-minute walk to the central office, as I would set aside my last 2 class periods to go work on policy and leadership initiatives every day. Speed up decades later, and my son is indeed going to Hillsmere, where I have been a 2-term PTA president and advocacy chair, continuing to write letters to the editor in support of our schools, and back in the boardroom every single meeting, advocating for our kids in the county, as we face similar challenges from when I was a student, only with a much larger student population and more budget cuts. And just as when I was a student, it doesn't matter if the issue had a direct impact on my son or his school, because to me, what impacts one kid or one teacher, impacts everyone, which is why I was one of those dozens of people to publicly speak up to keep busing for the kids in Newtown 20 and surrounding neighborhoods, along with giving public comment over the years for more teachers, more counselors, the lead in the water, healthy school start times, transportation, no cell towers on school grounds, and everything in between. Although on a side note, I will say my son has been even a bigger voice since first grade, attending board and county council town halls, in support of more teachers and counselors, which ultimately is what I hope for all our kids to be able to do, in terms of knowing they have a voice, the ability to make change, from any age. Thanks to some sage words from Carl Snowden at a community meeting, one of the things I often talk about on the campaign trail is how elected officials are only in office a certain amount of years, and will only be able to accomplish a certain amount of change. So the real issue is what legacy would we leave during those years in office. And for myself, the real legacy I want to leave goes beyond any of my experience or skills in education, and that is being able to show that we all have the ability to make a difference, to have a voice, to be a leader, to take risks and fight for those around you. Those are the beliefs I had when I decided to be an attorney at age 5, and they have remained with me throughout every decision I made in life. Which is why as more and more community members asked me to run for the Board of Education, it just seemed like a no-brainer to finally take those beliefs to the next level, and have more control in the decision-making after a lifetime of helping shape policy and being a voice for others from behind the scenes. I know I just talked a lot of the intangibles about why I am running, but before I close what motivated me to run for the board, I wanted to briefly touch on why it is so vital to specifically represent the residents of District 6. District 6, and especially those within the city of Annapolis, has the most diverse population in the county, including a large number of families struggling with food, shelter, and employment even before the pandemic. And the reality is, there hasn't been anyone on the board directly representing the people of Annapolis in years. I don't talk much about my own background, but growing up I did not just see the struggles of families, I felt the direct impact as I stood in line with my father to pick up the unemployment check every Friday at the office off of the old Forest Drive, or as my classmate in 3rd grade who was Black, who obviously had a cognitive disability, was constantly punished for his loud outbursts, or the bullying I experienced being forced to stand in the aisle of the bus with my cello, or seeing how the diverse class I had in elementary school with kids from the Hillsmere community, Arundel on the Bay, and Robin Wood, slowly dwindled in the classroom until it was almost completely all white by high school, all of which are sadly still going on today in our schools and community. I hated that fact that I wasn't old enough to take action to stop such inequity, such injustices, back when I was 11, and that passion, that desire to never be neutral between right and wrong, but find out the right and upholding it, wherever found, against the wrong, has remained with me, and is why I will be fighting for our families in District 6 for as long as I am here. Being on the board just would allow our community to have a louder voice in that fight. Just in closing, I often hear from voters that they have no stake in education because they don't have kids or the kids are all grown up. The reality is, it's not just our taxes that make us all matter in the fight for quality education, but our kids do matter to each resident of our county. They are going to grow up to be our doctors and nurses. They will be working at McDonald's or Carroll's Creek Cafe, repairing our cars and delivering groceries. or volunteering at the Eastport Fire Station. And that's why it's so critical to ensure those kids now have the equitable and high-quality education they all deserve to go after whatever dream they see as success, and why I did not decide to run to have my voice heard, but to make sure I can hold up the backs of my fellow neighbors of all ages and backgrounds, so their voices are heard.
All right, thank you. Melissa, you have been an advocate for a long time, and your background definitely is very interesting and very intriguing, and you bring a wealth to it, to this position, potentially to the position. So Joanna, Ms. Tobin, your turn. So same question. What made you decide to run for District 6 Board of Ed?
Like India, I've come at this over a lifetime of experience of education, passion for education, and a sense that every individual matters. And if you're going to touch that, you have to touch education. And very specifically, as I said, I had a broader experience growing up as a child all over the world. And I was the outsider everywhere I went. I had to find my way in to every community, sometimes even not speaking the language. And that was actually an invaluable experience because it made me understand that there's a way to do that everywhere you go. And that approaching every person you meet as a specific individual, as a different individual, is when real education actually happens. And so that experience has stayed with me in everything else I've done my whole life. And I should say that at the core of it, I am running for this position because I think you simply cannot have a sound functioning society. You certainly can't have a sound functioning democracy without good, equitable public education. I've never thought it was more important than it is now that we fight for that. Now, I've seen that from many different angles. As I said, I grew up all over the world. I had that experience in all different places. I was in first and second grade in the north of Nigeria in the middle of the Civil War. I had classmates who literally walked 2 miles to school, in some cases with a younger sibling on their hip, and we all wore uniforms and put on their school shoes at the gates to the school because those shoes were going to have to last for all the younger children. I've seen the sacrifices that people make all over the world to get an education. And I've carried that with me my whole life. Of course, as I said, I then went on to teach at the college level. And when I was teaching undergrads, I kept thinking about what their K through 12 education had prepared them for or not prepared them for. And for me, education is really about what, especially K through 12, is what is it going to provide as a basis for young people, not just to go to college or get a job, but to live a life. That's why education matters, is that it is the mechanism to enable young people to develop into productive, happy, fulfilled members of the community, into full human beings. That's what I value in education. That's why I think it matters. And so having spent a number of years teaching undergraduates, I found myself being drawn more and more to work in the area as a volunteer in oversight work around K through 12 education. And that brings me to another aspect of my work, which brought me to wanting to run for this office, which is I have done oversight and governance work in education now for years. As I said, I chaired the board of a private school. I have spent years chairing accreditation teams evaluating public charter programs all around the country. I've spent years asking the questions that have to be asked to get to the answers that need to be answered, right? To get the real answers, to get the accountability that we need from school leadership. And that was also something that I came to be very conscious of as a parent myself. I saw the frustrations of parents trying to advocate for their children. I saw how difficult it is to find time to go sometimes to a 3, 4, 5 hour Board of Education meeting and wait for your 3-minute opportunity to give your testimony, and how often it wasn't the parents who, you know, were working, didn't have time to do that, didn't have childcare. They weren't making it so often to those board meetings. The inequity of that was huge. And it made me realize that given all the experience that I have in all these different facets of education, I could bring that to working on the board, being a voice for the families of this district. And as has been mentioned, this district has particular needs really unlike any other part of the county. We are more dense, we are more diverse, we are more urban. All of those things I think are our strengths, but those voices need to be represented. And I believe I have the experience to do that. And there are very specific things I would like to see happen. I've watched too many times that when we lose wonderful teachers every year out of this county into other counties, we need to work on teacher retention. We need to have the mechanisms, the class sizes that are manageable, the pay that is equitable with other counties surrounding us, the professional development that is teacher driven, the mentoring that allows us to nurture great teachers and keep them for our students in this county. I also am very concerned about student well-being. That is something that I became very concerned about. I've advocated for years for reliable, safe, well-run transportation. That is one of the most basic pieces of equity we need to have in place. And again, particularly in this district, because we are in a district where children are often being asked to walk unsafe routes across busy, trafficked streets to school. And while the distances might not fit some countywide rule, our children in this district need to be able to have safe, reliable transportation and activity buses after school. I've also advocated for, again, reasonable class sizes, because students fare better when they can actually form relationships with their teachers. The teachers know them individually, and we need to get those class sizes down. Annapolis Middle School, for example, right now is suffering terribly from classes that are much too big, and other schools in our districts have the same problem. I'm also, as I said, very, very concerned about mental health. Our students, and this is only going to increase in our current situation, we need sufficient counselors, we need sufficient mental health support to make sure that our students' full emotional and physical needs are met. Again, no society can function without good public education, but good public education has to first meet the basic needs of the students before they can even begin to learn. And so those things need to be in place. And finally, accountability and transparency. I am deeply, deeply concerned, as we all should be, about the fact that hate and bias and bullying crimes are not addressed consistently and effectively system-wide. They need to be. I am also very concerned that our buildings, once we can get back into them, need to be safe, up to date, and equitably available to all our students. And finally, our special ed students need to be assured that their needs will be fully and faithfully met, and that our leadership can be held accountable, that we get the answers that we need. the superintendent works for the board, not the other way around, and people need to understand that. So those are keys that I think are really important. But finally, let me just say one last thing really about why I'm doing this. My daughter is 18. The night she was born, I almost died. And I had to have 10 units of blood, and I heard the doctors say 3 times, "We're losing her." And I did not know if I would make it from moment to moment. But thankfully, I did. I had wonderful doctors. I had a wonderful hospital that I was in. Our daughter was born on September 6th, 2001. We got home from the hospital on September 10th, 2001. And the next day, of course, was 9/11. And that experience taught me that life is too short and too precious not to do what really, really matters. And I am running for this office because it really, really matters. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. I mean, both of you bring just such a wealth of experience and background that will definitely benefit the community either way, and our students, and specifically your strong advocacy. Both of you ladies have been advocating for a long time in the community and for our students, and that is what we need to move our community and our students forward. So thank you. So our last question is, we're going to flip it, and I'm going to ask Ms. Tobin first. What is your view on COVID-19 and the impact that it's going to have on the school reopening?
Thank you. So let me first say, I think the school system had no choice but to follow the medical advice and set us up for a virtual semester this fall. It's not what anybody wants. It's not what anybody thinks is best, but it is necessary for the safety of our students, our teachers, our families, our staff. Unfortunately, however, it has only, the virtual environment has only widened a number of inequities that are already there. And it has also demonstrated for anybody who was not aware, I think we're all now fully aware that education is core. That when the schools don't run, nothing else does. That, as I said, education touches everything, and we need to treat it accordingly. It is an essential service, and we need to understand that. There are communities, however, that are even more deeply affected by it than others. Special education students, particularly those with the most profound needs, English language learners, and students in vocational technical training who need a lot of hands-on work, are obviously at a huge disadvantage. I think we need to be very clear on what it's going to take to hopefully begin to bring, for example, our special education students with the most profound needs into the building when they can. I mean, in addition to all the other things we need to do, to the broadband access, to getting devices to every student. For these populations, we need to look at the possibility of bringing them in one-on-one with their teachers. But we need to know what's going to have to be in place to do that. We need sufficient teachers who are willing to do this and who are frankly going to need to receive hazard pay to do it, because they will be taking on a risk that their colleagues who are teaching in a virtual environment will not. We also need bus drivers who are willing to take this on. They too need to receive hazard pay for the same reasons. We need custodial staff who are willing to take this work on. They too need hazard pay for the same reasons. And we need an absolute guarantee that teachers and students will have exactly the supplies they need. There will be no question that the hand sanitizer, the soap, the appropriate masks, all of those things will be in place if this is going to happen. So that's how I see this unfolding, unfortunately, that we're going to have to try to begin to bring the populations most affected in, because special education families are suffering deeply. But we're going to also have to be able to shore up the losses in learning last semester. And we're going to have to ensure that the learning that occurs this fall is of a higher caliber than last semester. And I've seen, as we all have in the news, that the system has purchased a new learning platform. Hopefully there will be sufficient time for teachers to learn how to use it. It seems a rather short time frame to me. But I think there's something else that we all have to recognize. We, as the adults in this community, are the ones who are making the decisions that determine our children's education. Our children are our future. We have to understand that. Whether we actually have children in the system or not, as India noted, these children are our future. And we as adults are going to have to make the decisions, the sacrifices if necessary. If education is in fact an essential service, which many people are saying it is, and I agree, then we're going to have to treat it as such. We're going to have to say that perhaps it is more important to open schools than bars, for example. Possibly we can't have both. And we're going to have to decide what matters to us. And by the way, as I've often said, I've learned as a teacher and a parent that children don't often do what you say, but they always do what you do. So the decisions that we make are the decisions they will make. So I would say that we have to be very clear in our minds, given the COVID shutdown that we're facing, what our priorities are. We have to put the resources behind them, and we have to make clear that we are actually going to support the teachers and the students and the system going forward with real resources and real pay. Thank you.
Thank you. So Ms. Oates, I'm going to ask you the same question. What is your view on COVID-19 and the impact on school reopening?
Needless to say, COVID-19 has been a game changer in all phases of our lives, including the magnitude of its impact on many of our kids and the school system. The sudden jolt to online learning was not easy on any of us, and it makes sense many would be wary of continuing online learning in the fall, even with legitimate concerns over the safety of our kids and staff if they return to school. This is just a small sampling, but when Joanna and I were in a session last week with families of special education students from around the state, they polled those on a Zoom call about the impact the spring had on their kids' learning, and not a single person marked that it was positive. As much as everyone was trying to do the right thing during the first few months of the shutdown, we cannot have the same negative impact on the emotional and academic well-being of our kids and teachers that we experienced in the spring. I will say up front that as we approach the reopening of schools, any consideration of opening actual school buildings for in-person learning needs to prioritize the infection levels in the actual community and the safety measures being enforced. If you look around the world, those schools able to bring children into the classroom had low infection rates in their specific community and strict safety social distancing protocols, while locations with large outbreaks in schools had the reverse, with high local infection levels, and governments that eased safety measures too soon. Until we know our kids and staff will be safe, we cannot fully open the doors. Same goes with transportation and other factors that all go along with having children in school. We must ensure transportation not only meets all the safety requirements but enforces those requirements, which is why we need new staff in the transportation department now to effectively coordinate these changes to protect our children. That being said, since we are not reopening our buildings to start the fall, we need to make sure measures are put in place to check on the implementation of all the different plans and ensure all our kids actually getting the same, equal, education as their peers. In the spring, there was no consistency in tracking attendance and assignments, and more importantly, the word engaged was disturbingly misused when discussing student involvement in online learning. Hopefully, the new format with actual teaching will improve most of those gaps in engagement, but there is still so much unknown, with some families having no access to the online classrooms and others who have to share one device, and not knowing when those families will get additional computers. Until all our students have equal access to the assignments, there will be no equitable grading by teachers. Then are students that require additional attention. COVID-19 has only exacerbated the inequity gaps for many of our students, which is why schools must find ways to safely accommodate certain students that require in-person instruction or additional supports, such as some students on IEPs and 504s, students with limited English, the homeless, or those from disadvantaged homes. The pandemic does not negate state and federal law to provide these students with the same level of education as their peers, and we cannot use lack of funding or resources as excuses. Just as I saw in my work on juvenile detention reform, that when a child is pushed out of school, they lose instructional time and are more likely to get in trouble. I have seen similar things going on with the pandemic, with so many of our kids losing instructional time and not having a proper support system at home. Nothing was normal before the pandemic. This is the time where we must look closely at both what was wrong before and after the shutdown, and find ways to correct course so all our kids are getting the quality education they deserve, and our teachers and staff get the support they deserve and need. And just one last thing, even though most of our kids will be learning at home for the start of fall, we cannot wait until they finally meet in person before focusing our lessons on the emotional and social well-being of all our kids. COVID-19 has resulted in a lot of mental and emotional stress for both kids and teachers, and so social emotional learning has to be integrated into the lessons even if done remotely. Otherwise, COVID-19 will have lasting effects on our community for years to come. School is much more than just curriculum, and we need to acknowledge all our kids' needs before we even think of their actual learning.
Thank you. It is very true. You ladies have stated it very succinctly and elegantly that, you know, our students are our priority, and their health, their well-being, their academic, and even social are important. And we've got to join together and make sure that we do what we need to do to get them back in school safely. So thank you. So at this point, ladies, I want to thank you and like to give you an opportunity to make a closing statement. Ms. Tobin. Oh, you're muted. Okay. There you go.
Are we good?
Yeah, you're good.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me this evening. Thank you for doing this for the community. I think it's a huge service that you are doing for individuals who, you know, should remember this is the first time we have actually ever been able to vote for our representative on the board for District 6. I would just like to say in closing that it is my great honor to run for this position. I never thought I would run for an office in my life, and I'm tremendously grateful. I've got this opportunity, and it's my goal to be a voice for all the residents of District 6, to bring, as I said, accountability and transparency to the board, to be a voice for equity, to be a voice for the students whose families don't have time to come to school and talk to the teachers, to be able to listen to the community, and to bring all my experience, all my background at a time when everything is changing. We have a chance to recreate what is best. And my experience, having looked at programs all over this country, having studied in schools all over the world, having taught in multiple settings, gives me an opportunity to bring all that experience to reshaping our schools in the image that we want them to be, where they will best represent our students, and to move away from a past that has been too rigid, too inequitable, too divided, in my view. And also to bring my skills, having moderated and led leadership programs for 15 years at this point, to the leadership that we desperately need on the board in what are going to be particularly difficult fiscal times, when we all have to stand up and make the argument as to why our best investment are our children and our future. Thank you.
Ms. Ochs, thank you. A closing remark from you?
I just wanted to say thank you again for hosting this discussion and the upcoming candidate forum. I know how much all of you involved in the partnering organizations do to support our communities, and it truly is a pleasure to be able to connect with you and your members, along with public at large who have a chance to watch this discussion. And I look forward to hearing from more of my fellow residents so I can help support our community and all of our needs, since, as I said, supporting our children is more than just education.
Well, thank you. It is our pleasure, has been our pleasure to have you on to give your views and learn a little bit more about you, Ms. Tobin and Ms. Ochs, as you run for school board. And I want to say thank you again and have a great evening on behalf of the partnership, so the collective, and we thank you. Have a great evening.